Donald Trump's second state visit to the United Kingdom was supposed to be a show of strength, diplomacy, and ceremony. Instead, it has turned into something far more uncomfortable for the U.S. president. Because this time, Trump wasn't just greeted with protests in the streets. He was confronted directly, on the world stage, by none other than King Charles III. And the British monarch did it in the most British way possible, with charm, subtlety, and a quiet but unmistakable humiliation delivered right to Trump's face. Trump looked uneasy as he sat at Windsor Castle, his expression sagging with exhaustion, boredom, or perhaps the realization that he was no longer in full control of the room. Across from him, King Charles delivered a speech that on the surface sounded warm and diplomatic, but between the lines carried sharp digs at Trump's record, his policies, and his failures as president. This matters because the United Kingdom and the United States share what leaders often describe as a special relationship. For decades, that partnership has rested not only on economics and culture, but on shared commitments to NATO, international security, and global stability. At a moment when Europe faces war on its own soil and when conflicts in Gaza and the Middle East threaten wider escalation, the symbolism of this exchange was powerful. It revealed the deep anxieties among America's closest allies about Trump's leadership, his foreign policy choices, and his willingness, or unwillingness, to defend democratic values. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the spectacle that opened Trump's UK visit. Britain rolled out the full ceremonial welcome. A military flyover, a parade, and even a carriage ride outside Windsor Castle. On the surface, it looked like an unprecedented second state visit meant to honor Trump. But just as the pomp and pageantry unfolded, protesters hijacked the moment. Activists from the Stop Trump coalition projected Trump's face alongside Jeffrey Epstein's onto the walls of Windsor Castle itself. That image, seen around the world, was a sharp reminder of Trump's scandals and his divisive reputation. The protests didn't end there. In London, thousands rallied against Trump's visit. The message from groups like the Stop Trump coalition was blunt. They were disgusted, they felt humiliated, and they accused Prime Minister Kier Starmer of appeasing Trump instead of standing up to him. For many in the UK, this wasn't a celebration of alliance, but a moment of national embarrassment. And then came the state banquet. Cameras captured Trump sitting uncomfortably as King Charles spoke. The king praised the closest defense, security, and intelligence relationship ever known between the two countries, reminding the world of the sacrifices made together in 2 world wars. He then drew a direct line to the present, declaring that, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace. On paper, it sounded like standard rhetoric, but in the context of Trump's foreign policy, it was anything but. Trump has been widely criticized for downplaying NATO, for excusing Russian aggression, and for failing to offer meaningful support for Ukraine. King Charles's words highlighted that void, and he did so with Trump sitting just feet away. The effect was unmistakable. Britain's monarch reminded the world that the United States has responsibilities that go beyond one man's politics. But Charles wasn't finished. He also highlighted the AUKUS submarine pact with Australia, calling it a benchmark for innovative and vital collaboration. Again, subtle but significant. Trump has often dismissed such multilateral deals, focusing instead on transactional short-term gains. By praising AUKUS, the king underscored the importance of alliances that Trump has repeatedly undermined. And then, there was the environment. King Charles has long been an advocate for climate action, while Trump rolled back environmental protections and famously withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. Without naming Trump directly, the king's repeated emphasis on preserving the planet landed like another quiet rebuke. For Trump, the optics were brutal. Here was a king, recovering from cancer treatment no less, looking sharper, more energetic, and more relevant than the American president seated across from him. It was the kind of image that resonates not only in Britain but across Europe and back in Washington. Allies saw a monarch defending NATO, Ukraine, and climate policy, while Trump appeared disconnected, even diminished. The international stakes couldn't be higher. Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues, with NATO allies pouring resources into Kiev's defense. Poland, a NATO member, has already suffered attacks on its territory. Under Article 5, any direct assault on a NATO country is supposed to trigger a collective response. But Trump has previously suggested he might not defend NATO members who don't pay their fair share. For European leaders, that uncertainty is terrifying, and King Charles's speech brought that anxiety into the open. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the conflict between Israel and Hamas has spiraled into what many describe as a humanitarian catastrophe. The United Nations has suggested it meets the definition of genocide. Critics of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris argue they haven't done enough to stop Israel's campaign. But Trump has gone even further, openly endorsing Israel's actions and even pledging to build a Trump Tower in Gaza. That position has alienated much of the international community, including Britain, where public opinion is far more critical of Israel's conduct. The juxtaposition was striking. King Charles spoke of peace, alliances, and global cooperation. Trump offered little more than nods, as if the weight of those issues barely registered. Allies noticed, analysts noticed, and ordinary citizens watching the images of Trump looking tired and detached noticed as well. CNN and other networks have already broken down the implications. They point out that only the U.S. president has the leverage to influence wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may be immune to European pressure, but he cannot ignore Washington. And Vladimir Putin has calculated that Trump's hesitancy on NATO works to his advantage. King Charles's speech, then, wasn't just ceremonial. It was a reminder to Trump and to the world that America's allies are watching, waiting, and worried. The political consequences back home are equally significant. Trump's critics will seize on this moment as evidence that he is out of touch, even humiliated by a foreign leader. His supporters will likely dismiss it as theater. But the optics of a British king indirectly lecturing a U.S. president on Ukraine, NATO, and climate change are impossible to ignore. For Prime Minister Kier Starmer, the stakes are high as well. He faces accusations of appeasement for hosting Trump with such grandeur while failing to stand firm on Gaza or Ukraine. The protests in London reflect a broader frustration with how Britain balances diplomacy and principle. Starmer's decision to embrace Trump risks alienating parts of his own base, even as he seeks to maintain strong ties with Washington. Internationally, this visit underscores the fragility of the global order. The so-called cracks are not minor. When the leader of the United States appears indifferent to Russian aggression, dismissive of NATO, and oblivious to humanitarian crises, allies take note. And when a monarch, traditionally above politics, feels compelled to deliver pointed reminders about collective defense and global responsibility, it signals a deeper unease. So what happens next? All eyes are now on Trump's meetings with Kier Starmer and other UK officials. Will he double down on his positions, or will he attempt to reassure America's allies? The next 48 hours could shape the narrative of this entire visit. Beyond the visit itself, the implications stretch into the future. If Trump continues to show indifference to NATO and Ukraine, Russia will feel emboldened. If he continues to back Israel without conditions, the conflict in Gaza could spiral even further. And if America's closest allies lose confidence in Washington's leadership, the so-called special relationship may never fully recover. This story isn't just about optics at Windsor Castle. It's about the direction of global politics, the credibility of alliances, and the future of America's role in the world. And right now, that future looks uncertain. We'll keep following every development of Trump's UK visit, the protests in London, the reactions from NATO allies, and the ongoing crises in Ukraine and Gaza. This is a game-changing moment, and it's one you won't want to miss. Make sure you like this video, Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think King Charles's subtle digs will actually matter, or will Trump simply shrug it off? Stay tuned, because we'll be covering every angle as this story unfolds.